Metal Shelf, and today we have the pleasure to receive the musician and also metal enthusiast and owner of one of the owners of Catacombe Oslo, Kenneth Tiller. Thank you for coming by to receive us on your place, Kenneth.
Thanks for having me.
So, you are kind of famous in the metal scene in Oslo because you have amazing collection actually for your support, and also you have a record label related to metal. How we start this passion for heavy metal and dark metal?
Oh, well, it's a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. I got into heavy metal music very early, when I was 5 years or something like that, with bands like Kiss, which is basically where everybody starts. And within a few years I also got into the more heavy metal bands like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and it basically just progressed from there. And by the mid-80s I was still listening to the softer part of heavy metal, but I started discovering bands like Metallica, and it progressed from there, always looking for the next more extreme band. And then of course I discovered Slayer, and then I was sold because I figured out this is my kind of music. And within just a few years I was digging deeper and deeper into the underground music with all the bigger bands, of course, like Creator and Destruction, Sodom. My first experience with Death, the American band. And from there I was digging deeper and deeper into the underground, started doing tape trading, buying demo tapes, reading fanzines, and eventually just spending every hour of my time listening to music and writing letters to bands all over the world. And it was in the beginning a hobby, but it became the biggest passion in my life. Buying all this stuff and listening to as many new underground extreme bands as I could discover. And eventually in the 90s I also started releasing some stuff myself on a label called Apocalyptic Empire Records. And from there it progressed again to a record store that opened 7 years ago in Oslo. Because I came up with this idea that I moved to Oslo maybe 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And
this store is Catacombe.
Yeah. And I came up with this idea that I knew other guys in Oslo that were doing the exact same thing as me. They were running record labels and mail orders within extreme music, Duplicate Records and No Posers Please. So I just talked to them at a party, I think, and I said, why don't we just join forces and open a record store? And that was it. We spent a few months thinking how we could do it, and during the Inferno Festival in 2015 we opened Catacombe. And 7 years later we're still there.
Resistance.
What?
Resisting.
Yeah. I mean, people thought we were crazy opening a record store in 2015 when record sales are dropping worldwide, but we have managed quite well. And also the vinyl, the LPs have of course had a huge comeback, so we survive a lot on that. Because CD sales are not what they used to be. But within the heavy metal community or metal community, a lot of people still buy CDs, but of course it's LPs and vinyls that is the main thing.
Yeah, because they released more, so
yeah.
The cult is still alive.
Yeah.
So it's still about a little bit your history, with the scene. How you feel like the impact when came the Norwegian black metal, the rise of the Norwegian black metal, even from people that were not from Oslo, for example?
Well, it was a very special time, of course, because I knew a lot of the bands from before the 90s because I was into buying demo tapes and stuff like that. So I was already into bands like Darkthrone and Mayhem, of course, and Cadaver and Amputation, that would later become Immortal, and also the Emperor stuff, Thou Shalt Suffer, that they used to be called, and stuff like that. So I could see like a progress from the bands being very death metal oriented, and then becoming more and more black metal oriented in like around 1991, and of course when Darkthrone released their first black metal album, A Blaze in the Northern Sky, everything changed, you know. All the bands became black metal, and it was a very special time. Everything felt new and fresh and exciting. And every album that came, you know, in the period 91 to 3, it was excellent. It was like every album was such a killer. So it was a really special time, yeah, absolutely.
Cool. And can I ask you to, like, because you have this store, you have like the record label, and you have also your own collection that's not small, I would say.
It's a bit bigger, but yeah.
It's still like very impressive. And I ask you to choose like some of 5, let's say not favorite albums, but some albums that you think that is worth to mention. I know that it's always changed, depends on the mood and etc. Depends on the time of the year as well. But what you have today for us, like 5 albums, starting from the 51.
All right. Well, I have them here.
Ta-da!
I've been giving it a little bit of thought. So I was thinking, instead of doing the obvious, like going with all the Norwegian black metal bands and all the, you know, classics like Destruction, Creator and stuff like that, I was just thinking what made the biggest impact on me. And this one, Battery, Blood, Fire, Death. A lot of people always say, oh, it's the first album or the second album that are the best, but in my humble opinion, it's this one. This one was the one that made it for me. It came in '88, and for me it's the, I don't know, it's like the progress from album number 1 to 3 and until this 4th album is so majestic, and the production is big, and I love every single track on it. And for me it's like the ultimate Battery album. I know a lot of people think some of the previous albums are better, but this is the number 1 for me. And also I think a lot of things with what you like has to do with when you first listen to it, you know. And I've been around a while, and I'm old, but I'm not that old, so I didn't listen to Battery in 1983. So this was probably the first or maybe the second album I got from Battery, so that's also maybe why it made such an impact to me. And this came in '88, like I said, and black metal, like the Norwegian bands, didn't really exist by that time.
So this album, like, it came out '88, right?
Yeah. And I'm just gonna say that '88 was the Norwegian black metal, and black metal in general didn't really exist at that time, so that's maybe also why it made such an impression on me, because the sound is very black metal and the vocals and everything, and I'm pretty sure it made a very big influence on the Norwegian bands and black metal in general, that it came a few years later, because the sound on, well, it goes for all the Battery albums actually. He was black metal before all the other black metal bands.
The third part turns more epic, and the epic black metal and Viking metal, etc.
Yeah.
He was a visionary.
Yeah. And going on to the...
So Battery!
Yeah. Gonna go on to the other one. I'm actually maybe...
And so now you have like the fourth, it's not fourth place exactly, but a fourth album that you should mention.
I should actually, maybe I should have done this as number one, but...
Okay!
But I forgot. But this is maybe the album that made the biggest impression.
Slayer, Raining Blood's a classic.
Yeah, because like I said, I was into bands like Metallica. I started listening to Metallica and
The Americans.
yeah, and all the regular heavy metal bands like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Motorhead, and Accept and stuff like this. But then I saw this advertisement. I think it might have been in Kerrang magazine, where it said the fastest band in the world. And I knew I had to check it out because, like I said, I'm old, but I'm not that old, so I didn't listen to Show No Mercy in 1983, and I didn't know Slayer before 1986. But when I saw that advertisement, you know, the fastest band in the world, I knew I had to check it out. So I got this LP, and it just blew me away. And also, as with Battery, a lot of people say that maybe the albums before this one is better. People prefer maybe Hell Awaits, but for me it will never be anything else than Raining Blood. It will be the ultimate Slayer album, and also in many ways probably the ultimate speed thrash metal album ever, at least for me. It's I mean, still today I don't think 1 week go by without listening to this album at least once.
So is your
like 30, 40 years later.
Wow. So Slayer, Raining Blood.
Yeah.
Classical from the 8th, Eternal from since then.
Yeah.
And so what you can have after this?
Well,
Better and Slayer.
yeah.
I can say that you start very strong already.
So I was listening to all the thrash metal and speed metal and black metal bands like Battery, but I was still searching for, you know, even more extreme music. I wanted more and more heavy, faster, everything more extreme. So in sometime in '88, I came across this record.
Death.
And I had heard that there was this band in the UK that would just blow your mind because it was completely off the top noise, faster than any bands. So I knew I had to check it out, and I knew nothing about the band. I just saw the cover and the logo, and I thought, all right, I gotta buy this. And of course, this one also blew my mind. It's grindcore, so it's extremely
It's like a punch on your brain.
brutal.
Yeah.
It's still one of my favorite albums. I mean, I listen to it a lot even today. It's like a whirlwind of noise, but it's still absolutely killer in my mind. So, and this album also got me into the grindcore scene, and I was really into that for a while with bands like Carcass and Extreme Noise Terror and Doom, all these British bands that came out on Eric Records and other labels in the UK that did a lot of grindcore, Bolt Thrower, early recordings by Bolt Thrower, stuff like that. I was heavily into that for many years, or at least a year. Things changed very fast in these years because there was always new bands and new scenes, and just during 1 to 3 years there was grindcore, death metal, black metal, everything exploded at once. So
yeah, and splatter and etc.
Yeah.
It was a lot of creativity.
Yeah. But the thing with this band is that the guys were really into a band called Repulsion. And Repulsion actually recorded an album 2-3 years before this album, but it never got released for some reason. And I even think there is a Repulsion track on this album, if I don't remember completely wrong. But because of Napalm Death, I of course had to check out
Napalm Death, from Leben to Obliteration.
Yeah.
And now we have Repulsion.
Yeah.
Horrified.
So because of Napalm Death, they introduced me to Repulsion. And with Repulsion, I discovered one of the greatest albums ever recorded. And it also got me very much into extreme underground death metal. And I got, because of Repulsion and because of this album that was officially released in '89, I think, after being recorded in '86, I think. Because of this album, I also got very much into the US underground death metal scene, and I started buying a lot of 7-inch EPs and early recordings of death metal bands over there in the States. Bands like Repulsion and Autopsy and yeah, stuff like that. So it's a true classic. It's in the borderline between death metal and grindcore, but it's really super excellent record. And I was so thrilled when they started playing live just a few years ago. They even visited Oslo. This band never did any shows in Europe, and for a long time they didn't exist, but they had a comeback, and they played in Oslo, and it was fantastic to see the band live and hear the Horrified tracks after 30 years on LP and finally see it live. It was such an excellent time.
You felt horrified.
Yeah.
Horrible joke, I know, but I need to do it. So, Repulsion, Horrified.
Yeah.
What you have now, so after that?
Well, this was '89, so it was the time that black metal was on the horizon. It started showing its ugly face. And
with a lot of corpse
I have
paint.
2 albums actually that are very noisy and very extreme, but they influenced me a lot. It's Blasphemy, Fallen Angel of Doom, and it's Beherit, the Oath of Black Blood. These are some of the earliest releases and recordings of what would become the black metal scene. And this is both released in 1990, so it was before any of the Norwegian bands released any. They are very extreme, very noisy, very brutal, and it might not be something I'm listening to every day. It's what we would call war metal these days, because after these bands came out, a lot of other bands started copying their style, and somebody came up with the phrase war metal, so I guess that's what you call it these days. Like even one step further than black metal. But at the time they influenced me a lot because it was so extreme. It was probably the most extreme music I had heard at the time, and also because of the image, you know, they had the paint on their faces, they have these black and white covers, some red logos, and it was a big influence on me, and I also assume it was a big influence on what would happen in Norway later, because these albums came before anything happened in Norway.
It's a movement worldwide.
Yeah. So the next step for me would naturally be to explore what would later become the black metal scene, you know, digging deeper into the bands that existed, and there were not that many bands. And I think my number one favorite from this period is this one. It's Master's Hammer, with the album Ritual. And listened to this one 1,000,000 times, and it's still one of my favorite albums, because this wasn't just black metal noise, it was really emotional, majestic, big music, if you can call it that, and I had vaguely heard about the band through Slayer magazine, that had mentioned their demos and stuff, but I knew nothing about them. But actually this one was picked up at Helvete shop. Øystein Aarseth was importing a big bunch of the records, and he recommended this one, so I thought I would buy it when I visited his store once, and it's probably the best buy ever because it's one amazing album.
And also the cover is very interesting.
Yeah, and the fact that they were singing in Czech language, I didn't understand anything of the lyrics, but just made it a lot more grimmer, you know, with the Czech language. And I have a big belief that these bands, Blasphemy, Berit, and Master Summer, they probably had a lot to do with things happening in Norway. 1 year later, when Dark Throne came with their first black metal album, because all these records came out before anything happened in Norway, and I think a lot of people have this misunderstanding that Norway was always the first black metal country. But,
no, in Brazil we've been doing this since 83, 82.
Yeah. I mean, you have Sarcophago from
Brazil, Vulcano.
Yeah. And of course, Master Summer and Blasphemy and Berit. I think all these bands influenced the Norwegian scene a lot to change into the black metal direction, and of course from 91, when Dark Throne released their album, everything exploded in Norway, so the rest is history, as they say.
And it is.
But if nobody's heard this one, they really need to check it out. That's the records I picked out. A little bit obscure maybe for many, but instead of like presenting what any other probably might have presented, I chose those records. They are all one of my favorites and have made a big impact on me. So
this is quite interesting. I would say thank you so much for sharing this huge knowledge. I think it's something that you should listen today, maybe.
Yeah.
And like for what I would like to know from you, like what are your expectations for the metal recording industry, or for the store? Like how you see this, like, because you are directly involved. I know that you're closer label now, but like how you see the future? Still there's future for like the cult, or it's gonna be just that, like cult, there's a lot of new bands coming out, and now that the pandemic is under control, looks like, how you feel?
Well, that's a good question. I think metal in general, the metal community and the metal scene has never been as healthy and as big as it is now. I mean, I think heavy metal, black metal, death metal, everything has become really big. So I see a very good future for this kind of music. I mean, it's become very professional. You know, these big festivals and big recording budgets and big labels around. It's nothing like it used to be in the 80s and early 90s. So I think the future for this kind of music is very good. As long as the metal community still keeps supporting the bands by buying the records and going to gigs, and I think that is no problem with metal. People have always bought albums, and people are in generally quite good at supporting the bands by buying merchandise and going to gigs. The only problem is basically maybe that it's just too many releases coming all the time. it's become so huge.
Sometimes it's noise and hard to get, and after some years you listen that thing that is like, oh, this is from 2 years ago, but now sounds new for me.
Yeah.
So it's hard to pick up sometimes.
Yeah. No, it's become impossible to keep up. It's there's hundreds of new releases every week. I mean, just in extreme music. So it's survival of the fittest, I guess, with both bands and labels. So it's become harder to like get out of the underground and get on the surface and get people's attention. But of course, that also means that the bands must work harder and make better music. And so in a way, it's a good thing, but it's also become a bit of a problem. I think that there's so many bands and so many releases all the time. It's impossible to keep up with everything. It's not what it used to be when you had like
it's too many
3 new albums every month.
I have access to much different like kinds of channels for information. You have like the social media, you have like the Spotify, you have like the concerts, the web zines and so on. Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and for the good talk today. And yes, Metal Shelf!
Bye.